So when my youngest son was about 3 years old, he ripped a chunk of his hair out with a power drill, and it happened on my watch. We were just moving into a rental house where we were going to be staying while I built the house for my family. And I was putting up some shelves in the garage, and he was in there with me because he's always loved messing with tools. I let him use my drill. I, of course, took the bit out, thank God. But before I knew it, he had pointed the drill at himself and squeezed the trigger, and a bunch of his hair got wrapped up in the drill, and it ripped it right out of his head. Of course, he was crying, and I was panicking because I wasn't sure exactly what had happened because I wasn't paying attention. And that moment really affected me in a profound way because really it was a picture of my whole life at that point. I was wrapped up in so many things and my focus was all over the place. I was running my own cabinet shop and making preparations to build this house for my family, and I was not focused at home. And I remember having this immense feeling of guilt about what had happened to my son because I knew it was due to my lack of attention and my lack of focus. And just a day or two later, I was driving into my cabinet shop and listening to a book by a man named Brant Hansen. The book's titled The Men We Need. And I sort of had this epiphany moment where I realized I've been giving all of my time and energy to my career and to my work and neglecting my family. Not majorly neglecting, but they certainly weren't first priority. And because I was listening to this book right around the same time this incident happened with my son, it really caused me to stop and examine how I was setting my priorities in my life. And I just realized that this career, this business I'm trying to build, that can wait. Because I don't get a second chance at these years with my kids at home. See, a lot of people will say, and I think it's true, that your 30s, your 40s, and even early into your 50s, those are your prime career building years. That's when you have the most energy, the most creativity. That's when you can give a lot to your career. But it's also the prime family building years for most men. That's when your kids are young, still at home, even into the teen years. And this is your chance. You don't get another chance at these years. You have to build properly and make the most of it and invest in your kids. But the thinking goes, if I can work more during these prime years, then I'll be able to give my kids more opportunities, create more memories, maybe even leave them an inheritance one day. And so we convince ourselves that all this work we're doing is for them. But really, oftentimes it's just so we can pat ourselves on the back or kind of show the world what we're made of. So before I started my business, I was a firefighter in Sarasota, Florida. And I'll never forget this. The promotional process to make lieutenant was extremely competitive. Guys would go to all kinds of crazy lengths to get the top scores in this promotional exam because only a few would be selected every year. And they went to all kinds of extreme measures. There were guys that would hire coaches, take ADHD meds. Some guys even moved out of their house so they could be alone and focus on studying, not be distracted by the family. And on at least one occasion that I'm aware of, probably more, one of the guys actually ended up getting a divorce because he had spent so much time focusing on the promotional exam that his family grew distant, and he ended up losing them. And the whole reason he even started this process in the first place was to provide a better life for them. And I think that can happen to us without realizing it. We set off with a goal or with our ambition to create a better life and provide for our family, but we get so wrapped up in the thing, whatever it is, that we lose sight of the reason we started in the first place. So just the other day, I read this psalm, and I want to read it to you because I think it applies And I'll just say I am not a biblical scholar. I could be off here, but I want to read this to you and tell you what my takeaway is because I think it applies. Psalm 127, and it says, "Unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. It is in vain," I like this, listen. "It is in vain that you rise up early and go late to rest, eating the bread of anxious toil, for he gives to his beloved sleep." That verse speaks so much to those early years of starting a business. I was staying up late, waking up early, and even when I was home, I wasn't home. I was always anxious, trying to figure out how to make this thing work. So he goes on to say, "Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. He shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies in the gate." There are two main topics that I see in this passage. One, we see laboring in vain. Two, children are a heritage. And I don't know if this was the intent of the author, but what I see from this is a contrast in two things. On one side, you have all the labor, all the toil. And on the other side, you have these children that are a blessing from God. And it's almost as if the author is saying, stop what you're doing. You're focusing all of your energies in the wrong place. All this labor you're doing, it's in vain. Because what I've given you is something so much better. These children are a heritage, are a blessing, and that's where you need to be putting more of your attention. So shortly after my son had ripped his hair out under my watch, I decided I needed to change things up a little bit. My business was getting too much of my focus, so I started to scale things back. And that was a lot more difficult than I expected. And now I know this is my story. Your story could be different. I know this is not possible for everyone. I used to work 80 to 100 hours a week trying to keep food on the table and pay the bills. And I know sometimes you just have to do that. I totally get that. But at the time, I was fortunate enough to have some flexibility so I could take my foot off the gas a little bit. And I realized that I had just been given too much of myself to my work. So I decided to scale back my cabinet shop. And I'll be honest, it was a lot harder than I thought because all around me, my friends are building businesses and they're out there crushing it. And I'm going in the opposite direction. And I would tell people this and they all say, good for you, that's great. I wish I could do that. But in the moment, even though I knew it was the right thing to do, it was incredibly hard. It was totally against the grain of what I wanted to do. The internal pressure, the societal pressure, all of that was mounting up. So I made it my goal at that point to shift the way I think about what it means to provide and to define for me and for my family what is enough. And you have to define that for yourself. It could be just as simple as keeping the lights on, putting food on the table, keeping gas in the tank. For somebody else, it might be different. There may be more, but you have to define that for yourself and determine how much of yourself you need to give to your career, to your business, to provide that for your family. Everything after that is extra. And I'm not willing to sacrifice the relationships with my wife and my kids just for the extra. There's a quote from the Mary Poppins movie where she says, "Enough is as good as a feast." And I use that with my kids all the time because we have this tendency to always want more. And we never know what enough is. And there's another quote by, I think it was Rockefeller, maybe Carnegie, where someone asked him, "What is enough money?" And he said, "Just a little bit more." So my encouragement to you is define what is enough for you. It's probably less than you think. you probably have some outside pressure from the world that says you have to provide X, Y, and Z. But I think if you're honest with yourself, you can get away with giving a lot less. So find out what that is for you and for your family and give that. Do whatever it takes to provide enough. But everything after that, you should be giving all of yourself where it matters the most.